Dear Dr. Sundberg, Carbone, and McGreevy, continuing education programs routinely begin with a relevant history of the subject matter that is being taught. The history that needs to be recited at the Verbal Behavior Conference must first focus on the history of the hosts of that conference. Here is that history. From 2004 until late 2016, Kelly Woodridge told consumers that she'd earned a Ph.D. from the University of Texas. She actively solicited business during this period. Exploiting the competitive advantage of holding a Ph.D., she competed against other behavior analysts who had not earned a Ph.D. But according to the University of Texas, Kelly Woodridge never earned that Ph.D. In an official ruling in 2017, the Disciplinary Appeals Committee of the Behavior Analyst Certification Board determined that Kelly Woodridge had violated the Professional and Ethical Compliance Code for Behavior Analysts, which requires that behavior analysts like Kelly Woodridge act truthfully and honestly, and that they refrain from making public statements that are, quote, false, deceptive, misleading, exaggerated, or fraudulent. Now, they did this because they had caught her faking the Ph.D. And I think reasonable people can agree that anyone who's capable of faking a Ph.D. for over a decade is capable of anything. Unfortunately, federal court records for a case in El Campo, Texas, bear this out. It was an abuse and fraud case. And Kelly was the supervising behavior analyst in this case. According to page 8 of the Federal Magistrate's report in this case, CTAC wrote and sought to implement a behavior plan that called for the use of contrived exercises that were designed to repeatedly and intentionally provoke a 10-year-old child with a pre-existing traumatic brain injury to emotional decomposition, according to page 32 of the Federal Magistrate's report. CTAC's behavior plan for the child required that he be intentionally frustrated and provoked at least 45 times every day, according to page 33 of the Federal Magistrate's report. CTAC's behavior plan also required school officials to contrive tests to be imposed even in times of appropriate conduct that intentionally caused the child to lose control of his behavior. CTAC then demanded that the child be physically restrained when he was unable to control himself. And these physical containments were routinely imposed even before the 10-year-old's behavior was at all dangerous, according to page 34 of the Federal Magistrate's report. This was a violation of Texas law. What did this look like on any given day? Page 5 of the Federal Magistrate's report tells us, and I'll just read it. During a math game of tic-tac-toe, the 10-year-old child put his head down and refused to write the number 49 on the game paper. Rather than permit the 10-year-old child time to compose himself, CTAC repeated the demand that he write the number 49 on the game paper until his decomposition escalated to physical aggression. Then CTAC, with the assistance of multiple other adults, physically restrained the 10-year-old child on the floor for 45 minutes. All the while, the demand that he repeat the number 49 on the game paper was repeated. CTAC later advised the 10-year-old's guardian that CTAC intentionally provoked the 10-year-old child's decomposition and physical aggression to determine what CTAC was, quote, dealing with, end quote. According to page 35 of the Federal Magistrate's report, the 10-year-old child's behavior plan should have been constructed by someone, quote, with sufficient education, training, or experience to be considered professionally competent, end quote. Instead, the behavior plan was constructed by CTAC, which advocated interventions for the 10-year-old that were uniformly at odds with methods recommended by treating psychologists and other medical professionals. According to pages 32 and 33 of the Federal Magistrate's Report, the 10-year-old endured more than 40 physical containments after implementation of CTAC's behavior plan. The 10-year-old, the 10-year-old's mental health suffered significantly during CTAC's months-long campaign. After reporting all of these facts, did the federal magistrate conclude that CTAC's actions conformed to standard behavior analytic practice conducted by prudent practitioners? No. The federal magistrate concluded that CTAC's methods, quote, shock the conscience, end quote. The federal district court judge who presided over this case accepted the federal magistrate's report and recommendations in which she stated that CTAC's methods shock the conscience. The federal district court accepted these recommendations in their entirety. CTAC nonetheless told the judge in certified court pleadings that it had acted in self-defense against this fourth grader with a pre-existing traumatic brain injury. This claim of self-defense proves the point that anyone who is capable of faking a Ph.D., as the owner of CTAC, Kelly Woodrich, was doing at this time, is capable of anything. Not surprisingly, CTAC was forced to settle this abuse and fraud case. The 10-year-old victim in El Campo received a large settlement check. But this isn't the end of the story. Just a few years later, in 2015, Kelly Woodrich was at it again. This time, a 6-year-old kindergartner in Austin, Texas, who has epilepsy, was involved. Kelly Woodrich knew that this child suffered from seizures before she set in on him, and her notes confirm this. In Austin, as in El Campo, Kelly Woodrich engaged in the same kinds of artificial trials without consulting with the kindergartner's neurologists regarding his medical condition or his prescribed medications. And she did not consult with the child's parents either. Here's a quick summary. And to protect the child's identity, we will call him Jack. Kelly Woodrich is present in the kindergarten classroom to observe Jack's behavior. After having just met this child with a complex medical history, Kelly Woodrich immediately diagnoses the cause of the behavioral problems that have vexed medical professionals for months. Kelly Woodrich decides to intervene even though she has no parental consent to do so. She first singles out Jack by segregating him from the rest of the class. She rings several adults around him to hem him in, a human fence. The adults repeatedly demand that Jack write something of no educational value on a piece of paper. It's like writing the number 49 on the game paper all over again. Understandably, Jack does not like being singled out and humiliated in front of his classmates. But Kelly Woodrich's demands continue. Jack retreats under his school desk just as the child in El Campo did. He tells Kelly Woodrich no, wanting her to leave him alone. Eventually, Jack is coaxed out from underneath that school desk, but the demands continue. It's a barrage of demands. After enduring this for quite a while, Jack runs for daylight, escaping the adults whom Kelly Woodrich has ringed around him. Out of the classroom and down the hall toward the stairs he goes. He's trying desperately to escape. Several adults chase after this 6-year-old down the hallway of the elementary school. It's utter chaos. The adults eventually corral Jack, confine him again to a limited area, and this time they block his means of escape so that Kelly Woodrich can continue to go to work on him without any interruption. The demands continue that Jack write something on a piece of paper. Jack tells the adults, "Stop touching me." But the demands continue unabated. Some adults in the room begin to exhibit revulsion at Kelly Woodrich's behavior. Jack's teacher's aide leaves the room. She tells the school principal, "I can't do this anymore." One conscientious adult tries to rescue Jack from Kelly Woodrich's contrived trials, but Kelly Woodrich tells her no. Jack goes into full meltdown. Kelly Woodrich rounds up the other adults to pinion this child to the classroom floor. This kindergartner is just a little fella. So, if Kelly Woodrich's methods are so scientifically pure, ask yourself, why does she intentionally introduce chaos and havoc into a classroom, into a learning environment, in order to implement her methods? And why does it take 5 adults to carry out her methods by threat of force and actual force against a 6-year-old with epilepsy who weighs just 46 pounds and whose height is only 3 feet 6 inches tall? Why? And keep in mind, the school district states in writing that Jack is a loving child. Why does she need to do this? Jack eventually emerges from the physical containment, but Kelly Woodrich starts to rev him up again. After several more minutes of this, Jack melts down again. The same conscientious adult again tries to rescue Jack, and Kelly Woodrich again tells that adult no. Kelly Woodrich physically restrains Jack again. "Let me up," pleads this kindergartner. Kelly Woodrich is once again intentionally violating the physical autonomy and bodily integrity of a child with a neurological condition. Jack also tells the adults in the room that he wants to eat and that he wants to be with his friends. Why? Because Kelly Woodrich has already extended this lengthy artificial trial into the child's lunch period, and then after that, into the child's recess period. Kelly Woodrich refuses to allow this child to eat or to exercise at recess until she's gotten her way with him. This goes on for nearly 2 hours. The chaos that she's created even gets the best of Kelly Woodrich. She loses track of things. She can't remember if she's physically restrained Jack 2 or 3 times that day. The school principal who witnessed the event told the child's father that she would have called the police if she'd seen that father doing to his son what Kelly Woodrich did to the child in his kindergarten classroom for nearly 2 hours. The school district admits that Kelly Woodrich has violated the child's legally binding behavior plan, or BIP. And in retrospect, that's not surprising, because Kelly Woodrich had not even bothered to review a copy of the BIP or obtain a copy of the BIP until she was 38 minutes into her observation of Jack. During the weeks and months that follow, this 6-year-old's seizures increase radically in frequency, intensity, and duration. In the aftermath, the child's neurologists point out that stressful situations, like the one that Jack endured at the hands of Kelly Woodrich, have to be avoided because of the significant risk of morbidity, death, that undue stress poses for children with epilepsy. Kelly Woodrich could have learned this, but she did not make any efforts to meet with Jack's doctors before she set in on him and tried to impose and did impose all of this stress upon him in his kindergarten classroom. Now, Kelly Woodrich is able to rationalize this all away. She insists in writing that rounding up 5 other adults to intentionally evoke defiance, rage, anger, and despair in small children is research-based and scientific. So too evidently is pinioning these children to the concrete classroom floor. She's not a scientist. She has no medical training in her background. Kelly Woodrich even claims that Dr. Carbone's teachings justify her disgraceful actions. Remember, anyone who is capable of faking a Ph.D. for over a decade is capable of anything. These days, unfortunately, rationalizing abuse is not unheard of. There was, very recently, a highly publicized criminal trial involving a doctor who was abusing female gymnasts who were training for the Olympics. At the sentencing hearing, even this doctor did not possess the nerve, the audacity, to claim that he was acting in self-defense when he assaulted his young patients. But he did tell the judge that he'd been utilizing research-based and scientific methods. The judge repudiated the doctor's claims that he'd helped the victims, and the judge imposed the maximum punishment. Fortunately, the victims in that abuse case had had their day in court and had been allowed to counter the doctor's claims to scientific purity. Unfortunately and undoubtedly, some of the children who've been subjected to Kelly Woodrich's methods over the years have not had the same opportunity to speak out. For some of these children, this is because they are physiologically incapable of speech or are speech delayed, like the epileptic kindergartner in Austin. When all of Kelly Woodrich's flimsy justifications are dismissed, it can be tempting to speculate as to the real reason. She insists on going behind the backs of doctors and parents to go after small, defenseless children with special needs using methods that shock the conscience. Is Kelly Woodrich herself a former abuse victim who has allowed herself to be caught in a vicious cycle? We don't know. Whatever the cause of Kelly Woodrich's behavior, it is historically relevant to understand that Kelly Woodrich has absolutely no credibility. Dr. Sundberg, Dr. Carbone, and Dr. McGreevy, you must be prepared when the conferees at the Verbal Behavior Conference ask you about this relevant history. Do not choose ignorance as a basis for inaction. To accept Kelly Woodrich's excuses, rationalizations, and justifications at face value would be to consciously choose ignorance over the overwhelming evidence of malpractice, abuse, and fraud contained in the federal magistrate's authoritative report and in other credible primary sources. Do not turn away from this mountain of evidence. Just remember that this mountain of evidence pointing to malpractice, abuse, and fraud has not been compiled by persons who have faked an advanced degree for over a decade. These credible sources can be easily found, and I offer you my help. You need only ask. What your disgraced colleague, Kelly Woodrich, has to teach us at the Verbal Behavior Conference is not the content of her presentations. Rather, her publicly reported actions contained in credible primary sources are what inform us. They are object lessons in precisely what not to do. For that reason, I recommend that you make a panel discussion about her malpractice, abuse, and fraud a precondition to your participation in the Verbal Behavior Conference. Doing so will send a clear message to conferees who will attend the panel discussion that three of the leading lights in the field do not tolerate malpractice, abuse, or fraud. Now remember that recent prominent case involving the doctor who was abusing the female gymnasts? The victims warned scores of adults about the doctor's abuse. The adults dragged their feet or ignored these warnings altogether for far too long. And the resulting human suffering that could have been avoided continued for far too long. Do not repeat this mistake. Let it be said instead that your repudiation of Kelly Woodrich's dangerous behavior put a stop to abuse being suffered by the least amongst us. Let it be a forceful reminder that all persons analyzing special needs children must do so at the highest level of ethical standards. Thank you.